Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. On tonight's episode, I'm going to be talking about a picture called The Undefended Hour, which was created for the back of a book cover for writer and poet Anne Lindsay. I'm also going to be talking about the elements that make up a photo and how each aspect is either contributing to or detracting from the narrative you're trying to tell. And then, of course, I'll be talking about giving feedback on and critique on images that have been submitted for this week's episode. Quick plug first of all, though. I want to say a quick word about... there you go. Episode 6. I thought I had the hang of this, and already the technology is tripping me up once again. So if I do that, yes, there we go. So basically, the reason I want to plug this is because that's a photo of my daughter. We found out today that the photo I took of her a few weeks ago out by the garden shed has made it onto the cover of this coming up Dumfries and Galloway Life Magazine. So next week I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about this photo, the making of it, the reason why we did it, the reasons for the different aspects that went into it. But my daughter has a little business she's trying to start up called Megalicious, which you can find at Megalicious Food on Facebook or megaliciousfood.co.uk on the web or at Megalicious Food on Instagram. So plug out the way. Yes, so what I wanted to talk about, what I'm going to start with is a photo called The Undefended Hour. Now, once again, let me just pull this up and... Right, there we go. So if I move this across. So this photo here was an incredibly important one for me in terms of how I was progressing as a photographer. This represented a kind of a leap forward from the photos that I'd done up until this point. There was a whole number of different aspects I'd learnt, and in a way what I kind of like to talk about is a lot of the techniques that I've been discussing over the past few weeks, from rule of thirds to diagonals to whatever else I've been talking about. They kind of start to apply in this photo, plus a couple more that I'm going to be talking about in future weeks. And I've been sort of progressing with my photography, and I was learning more and more ideas and more techniques and more compositional insights. And then this opportunity arose where I got to put a whole bunch of them into practice at the same time. And the result I was delighted with. It quite blew me away compared to the photography that I'd done up until that point. It really did feel like it was in a different league. So it started off with Anne. Now, Anne is the woman here sticking on the lipstick, and she'd written a series of poems around a set of bizarre old black and white photos that she'd found, and she put them into a book which she called The Undefended Hour. And originally she came to me for an author's headshot, really, just to go on the back cover. But as we started talking about it, we thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to maybe try a narrative shoot? Now, the themes around the themes of the book were really based all around sex, death, and humour. So we thought, could we kind of include these aspects into it? So we were playing around, bouncing ideas. I went round to a house, we were sort of looking in different rooms, and there was a notion of mirrors, for one thing. And mirrors are wonderful devices in storytelling, because within with mirrors you can something could be going on in the reflection that you can't necessarily see from your normal viewpoint. And that makes it, that gives you an option to sort of start layering up and building up the stories. Suddenly remembered, I will just break in here. I meant to say, if you would care to leave a comment in Facebook, if you've got any questions, leave questions. If you'd like to just leave a nice well-meaning message, they're always welcome too. So yeah, I'll be periodically popping in and taking a little look at the Facebook messages. So yeah, by all means, leave a comment there. So sorry, breaking the flow. Back to this photo. So yeah, we've been talking about so mirrors sort of came up, and then we started thinking, what else could we do? And would it be more interesting if there was somebody in the background? And we kind of came up with this idea of potentially this sort of murder scene as such. And then we started thinking, well, who do I know? And anyway, good friends Richie and Sharon very kindly helped out and decided to be our models. And so we set up the scene, and there are several interesting aspects to this photo bits that I like. One of the things that I really like is the fact that at first glance you don't necessarily take everything in one go. The very first thing most people see is the eyes of Anne and the face, and the fact she's putting on lipstick. Our brains are pre-programmed to notice faces, and especially pre-programmed to notice the eyes of faces, especially when they're looking at us. So that's the first thing we see. Then we notice there's something going on in the background. We move across, and then we notice the woman sitting on the bed behind. And she's looking kind of almost sort of slightly smug, slightly pleased with herself. And you can see she's sitting in bed and there's bare shoulders and a sheet wrapped around her. And so you realise, it's kind of bedroom scene. And then you glance down and then you notice the guy slumped over with a knife in his back. And so even though it's a static two-dimensional image that isn't moving like a film, your eye traces it through. It starts with Anne, moves through to Sharon, drops down to Richie, and then you sort of start taking in the story. And then from there, you start moving out, and maybe you start looking around and finding other little details as well, depending on the resolution of your screen or the brightness of your screen as well. There's other things. I mean, you might notice there's a crucifix up in the corner here, but then you might also notice down just underneath the mirror, there's a ashtray, cigarettes in it, and just over, sort of slightly moving into the shadows here, to the left of the ashtray, there's a little picture of a Saint Teresa as well. So these things all start kind of adding up, and you start to build a story, except for the fact that you've got no idea what the story actually is, but you can't help yourself. You're trying to work out what the story is. And assuming you haven't kind of just gone, "Ooh, don't like that," and run off. For a lot of people, this becomes one of those photos where you just get drawn into it. It's almost like a puzzle you're trying to solve. And that is pretty unusual these days. I mean, there are don't get me wrong, there's a lot of photography that does that now, but the vast majority of photography doesn't do that. And up until this point, the vast majority of my photography hadn't done this either. So it became, this is one of the reasons why it kind of felt like a transformational step for me. This notion that, the realization that because you linger on it for longer, it becomes a more interesting photo. It sticks in your head for longer. And in terms of, if you're trying to advance your photography beyond the point whereby you just look at it and you go, well, I'm happy with this, but you actually want other people to notice your photo, you've got to have something which makes people stop for more than a few seconds. When we think about how fast you scroll through your social media feed now, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or whatever, we do it at high speed. And it takes something to make us stop for more than a second or two. And to really linger long enough to then sort of hit like to go I mean, sometimes, okay, there's a quick thing like a baby hedgehog or a little kitten or something, a very easy thing to like. But to actually really stop and look at a photo, study the photo, and this photo, because it had multiple layers, really sort of, like I say, it just sort of felt like a different level to what I'd done to this point. Technically, it was a difficult photo to do on a number of levels. One of the big things you notice here, now this is all done in one shot as such, but that Anne and Sharon in the background have had to be lit two different ways, or two different light sources. So I had to work out a lighting system for Anne, but then I also had to work out a lighting system in the background so that Sharon would show up. Now, it looks as though Anne is lit by the candles, but she isn't. I mean, the fact that the candles are down here on the right, and she's sort of lit with shadows heading off. That's the idea. The reality is, of course, the candles wouldn't have been bright enough for that. So I had an off-camera flash just the other side of the candles, which is then shooting the light across her face. The giveaway, if you look at the candles wouldn't have been lit like that. The actual candle itself wouldn't have been lit by the flame. But for the most part, you're not thinking about that. Again, so what I'm starting to move into here is the notion of the different elements that make it up that I wanted to talk about. But the candles, so you assume she's lit by the candles. Woman on the bed at the back, you assume is going to be lit by a table lamp. Again, in reality, the table lamp wasn't strong enough, so I had a separate light sitting over there as well. Now, in terms of even sort of then with Sharon, you've got a sense of the way the light is sort of skimming across her shoulders and her top. If she was turned just slightly more to her left, the light would sort of be bouncing off her chest. If she was turned slightly more to the right, she'd be lost in shadow from the light there. So just in the right place, you've got the light skimming across in a three-dimensional way. And so really, this was one of the early stages where what I did was I did my first real set of tethering the camera to the laptop. Now, I've done it a little bit before, but this is where it really came into its own. So tethering is, I've got the camera, I've got a wire coming out of the camera, and the other end is going into my laptop. And then I've got a program that I use a Canon camera, and there's a Canon program that you just download, and it's all pretty straightforward actually. And what it allows you to do is when you go click, the picture immediately appears on the screen next to you, and it's an absolutely invaluable tool. The number of times I have taken photos where I'm just looking in the back of the camera and it's not focused at the point that I wanted it to, but because the screen you're looking at is only about 2 or 3 inches wide, you can't tell that. The resolution isn't enough. So you think you focused on the eyes, but actually you focused on the back of the ears or the chair behind. And only when you've got home and you've pulled the pictures up on the computer do you suddenly realise it's not in focus, and it's a nightmare because you can't go back and check, or you can't go back and change it. So being able to tether your camera to a larger screen, and then when you've got that larger, you can pull up the picture and you can zoom in and see if you've got the detail exact, is it in focus right exactly where I want it to be, is absolutely invaluable. And if you're ever going to be doing this kind of photography, I would highly recommend you look into it. Whether your camera system like Canon has an easy one that sort of just, is easy to download, or if it doesn't, maybe sometimes you can get apps. I mean, these days, rather than a laptop, I very often use my tablet. I take a tablet with me, it's much more portable. And I can tether and do exactly the same thing. But again, it's a Canon-based app that does it, but I'm sure you can find something for your own system. But what that really allowed us to do was I set the camera up on a tripod, had the wire going to the laptop, and I could go click, immediately see. And then I could turn around and say, okay, well, what if you turn your head a little bit? What if you lean forward a bit? Okay, Sharon, shift your shoulders a bit. Bring your hand up. And each of these little things, so you kind of go click, shift, click, change, click, finesse this bit, work out that bit, move the camera, make sure it's framed how you want it, make sure the shadows are falling, you go and shift the light. And each time you are building it up and getting each aspect of the photo exactly where you want it. And it allows you to finesse it to the nth degree, to the point where you are happiest with the photo. You've hit the sweet spot in each of the different areas of the photo that you needed to. That then gives you the photo, a much better starting point for when you then take it into editing. Anyway, we were all delighted with the photo. It ended up on the back of the book. But there's another aspect to this that I think is particularly interesting, which I like in the story of this, which is, for all the fact that this is a very black and white, film noir, femme fatale, dark, moody picture, it was designed in colour. Now, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to give a talk specifically about converting to black and white and a number of different ways you can convert to black and white and when it's beneficial and when it isn't. So kind of as a taster forerunner to this, though, this particular picture, what's interesting, like I say, is it was in fact designed. So if let's see, double click on that, there we go. So here, what you can see is this is essentially the original. And the original is yellows and reds, or dark, deep reds and sort of slight gold, red and gold kind of colour scheme. And it was designed this way. It was designed for colour. When I took the original, when I was taking this photo, I wasn't thinking black and white at all. We knew we were going to have the murder scene, so we knew there was going to be, blood coming out. So we're going to have a dark red. So Anne brought out this deep, rich, wonderful red dress. I'm not sure how well that'll be turning up on your screen. If you can see the original, it's got a lovely deep red redness to it, and then lipstick to match. But then we've got other things, like on the ashtray. Then we've got the cigarette butts, also got the red lipstick on it as well. So you've got these little, so you've got the yellowishness of the candles and the candlelight and the bedside lamp in the background. And then both women have blondish, yellowish hair. So you've got this sort of yellowish scheme with the splashes of red. And I was really quite pleased with this. And then, but I suppose because the book itself was in black and white, I thought, well, what happens if I flip this into black and white? And so I then did, and I ended up with this photo. And suddenly it's, film noir. The shadow play just worked so well. I was quite blown away with it. And it's one of those odd things where you take your photo and then you get surprised by your own photo. I have to confess, these are the ones that I love the most. The photos that I've taken that I love the most are the ones which have caught me by surprise, where suddenly something has happened and it feels like it's just shifted into a realm I never expected. Sometimes you just can't do that. You've got a very, very tight brief. You're creating a very specific photo and you can't go very far from that. So the success or otherwise of the photo is based entirely on how well it fits that initial brief. But sometimes, and this was one of those cases, you've got a certain amount of freedom. You've got an idea of where you want to go, but Anne is also a very, very creative mind. And the idea of let's try, let's play, let's see where we can take this, gave us a freedom to explore, and it gave me a freedom to explore in the editing process as well. And then when I showed her, she was delighted with it too. So oddly enough, although it was entirely designed to be in colour, once I turned it into black and white, this is now the way it has only ever been presented. I've never printed up the colour version, I've never made a large version, but this black and white version has been made into postcards. I had a nice A2 print done of it for a couple of exhibitions. So it can still surprise you. Another little kind of interesting aside, I think, is when I'd finally got there and I turned it and I looked at it and I got this wow, and I was really excited in that kind of giddy way of you just taking a photo, and it's because it felt so much beyond anything I created up until that point. It was really exciting. It was like, wow, cool, I did this, me? Ooh, you know. And then shortly afterwards, it was followed by this massive stab of fear, which is, oh my God, what now? If I've created this, now people are going to expect me to be able to create photos of this level. But I've never created a photo at this level before. This is the first photo I've ever created at this level. What if it's the only photo? What if I've just got lucky with all this combination of elements? They just, the perfect storm. It's all kind of come together, and I never get this lucky again. Then every photo I do after this is going to be a letdown. People are going to think, call me a fake. And the whole imposter syndrome, which is a very common feeling amongst, well, everybody really, but with creatives, it tends to be particularly strong, where you're terrified people are going to find out that you don't really know what you're doing, or you don't belong in the room, or you don't belong amongst the peer group you've been placed in, or whatever it is. Other people just see what you present. Other people see the outside. And if you could put on a good show, people will take it as that's you. You, on the other hand, see yourself from the inside. You see yourself going with full of doubts, watching other people, seeing if they're buying into how you're presenting yourself. And so you feel all the insecurities regardless, and maybe nobody else sees it, but you still feel it on the inside. And so that's where imposter syndrome comes from. You feel like an imposter, and you're waiting for somebody else to recognize that you're an imposter and catch you out, and then show you up and humiliate you in front of everybody else. So that kind of feeling, but it then happens with the photography. I created a photo which was a whole step up from anything I'd done before. And now what if people just expected me to be able to do this all the time? And it was quite terrifying. There's excitement, but now got to live up to, you shifted the bar up and create a new level of reputation for yourself, but now you've got to live up to it. And it's quite a terrifying experience. And there's been a couple of photos as I've sort of gone on where I've done that, where I've felt especially pleased, and then followed by this absolute stab of terror. At least these days I tend to recognise it. But it doesn't happen very often, because in order to get that feeling in the first place, I've got to create something beyond what I normally feel like I'm capable of doing. Which in a way is kind of, I think, what I'm always chasing. I'm always chasing this idea of trying to create a photo which is beyond what I thought I was capable of doing, because it really is a thrill. That is the drug. That is the thrill. But you can get this stab of fear with it at the same time. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about now, I'll come back to this photo, but I do want to talk about the idea of the different elements that I was talking about, and how each photo you have, okay, best thing to do, let's put now, back a few weeks ago I was talking about rule of thirds, and I used this picture of Andrew Livingston as an example of rule of thirds. And as you can see, he's comfortably sitting off center, and we talked about all that. But the original picture, the unedited version, is this. And apart from, bringing out, playing down some of the highlights and bringing out some detail in the shadows, there are a couple of other things here. So in the original, for example, you've got the lights running in the background, which, okay. But you've also got this bright white spot just sort of below the center, off center, which is a reflection of the flash I was using to light him up. Sitting on the opposite side of the sun, he's half lit by the sun and then half lit by this flash, and this little space where the flash is catching. And that flash is not only not contributing to the photo, it's detracting from the photo. So in the editing process, I had to remove it. Now, for quite a while, I did use versions of this where I left the shop lights in because I felt, well, it's part of inside the shop. But more recently, I've removed the lights because I felt, again, they were a distraction from the story. The story isn't about really the inside of the shop, much beyond the tailor's dummies. The story is you've got Andrew, first and foremost, then you notice the shop dummies, and then you notice the reflections of the rooftops and architecturally what is quite a kind of Scottish town, really. Just those kind of shapes you don't get many places in England with roof shapes like that. So those three elements. So it's that notion of you've got different elements to the story, and the elements of the reflections, the element of the tailor's dummies, and of course Andrew himself, were all contributing to that story of Scottish tailor. The flash wasn't. The flash was detracting from that. Let's take another photo I want to talk about, which is one that I used in the first episode where I was talking about cropping. And this picture of Cafe Largo down at the beach. Now, we'd already decided the elements we wanted in it. We wanted, we're going to have the beach. We've got reflections in the wet sand. We've got them holding the instruments. So it seemed all the elements were in the photo. We decided what we wanted within it. However, this is the unedited version. And again, apart from the more obvious edits of slight colour change shifts and bringing out details in the highlights and darkening down shadows, or bringing up details out the shadows rather, there are a couple of more obvious differences. Now, one of the differences is the fact that in the original, this guy's sitting on a blue seat. Sue over here is wearing a blue dress. And in fact, actually, he's even got a blue set of playing cards there. And this blue, I felt detracted in a way. We've got the bright red of Tony's hat and his bongos. Also his trousers underneath, and even the cocktail here. And really that, and of course, oops, sorry, let's try and caught out again by my own clicking the wrong button. We've also, yes, and the red of the bow tie up here. So it made more sense to have the whole thing in red. So there's an element, the blue here isn't working. So we need to change that, and we change it to red. But there's another thing here, which is Sue had in her hand this feather. It looks a bit like a feather duster. It wasn't, and I'm suddenly, for the life of me, I can't remember exactly what it was. But something you can kind of wave around as you're dancing. She's holding it behind here, but it's not so obvious she's holding it behind. So it looks like it's just coming out of his back, and that doesn't look right. So there we've got an element to the photo which is wrong. So at that point, I then removed it. So another example then of, you can take, every photo has got aspects to it which are contributing to or detracting from the story you're trying to tell. So when you get round to, whether it's take it at the point you're taking the photo or at the point you're editing the photo, you really need to go round it. And sometimes what you've got to do is leave the photo, go away, leave it for a couple of days, come back and look at it afresh and see what leaps out at you. So if we go back to, let's go back to this photo then of Anne and Sharon and Richie. And so the elements in here were, we took a lot of time to try and make sure that we've got all the different parts that add to the story. And right now, when we turn to black and white, obviously we lost the red lipstick on the on the cigarettes, but it felt that was offset and balanced by what we gained from turning it into black and white in the first place. What I was talking about earlier, of the notion also of playing around with a few of the techniques I was talking of earlier. Now, in terms of a rule of thirds, let's just grab a pencil tool here, turn that to white. Sharon's off center, Anne's off center, eyes going right across here. So your rule of thirds grid, the main bit we've got here is going on. So she's sitting comfortably there, but we've also got Sharon sitting at a place on that line as well. So that works quite well. But another one that I wanted to talk about was the notion of leading lines. Last week I was talking very much about the notion of leading lines, and I was talking how, whether it's sort of following the rail tracks into the distance. One of the interesting things in that click change bit that I was talking about was Anne's dress, because originally her strap was pointing straight up. And that was fine. It seemed to be okay. But then I can't remember where this is a few years on, so I can't remember whether it was me or whether it was Anne or somebody else. But the idea came up to drop the strap off the shoulder. And as soon as you do that, we've now got a leading line which takes you straight up to Sharon. And it also means that you've got a line that this line here is also running up. So although they're not complete strong lines like a road or a rail, they are still pointers. They are still running it. And then at that point as well, there's the line, the straight up line up and down of the knife as well. Now, whether that's you see the knife and then you're looking up at Sharon, or you see Sharon and then you notice there's a line coming down, which I think tends to happen. You see here and then you notice the line coming down, which then draws your attention down to the body slumped on the bed. So that notion of leading lines and rule of thirds, they're all kind of coming into here. Now there's another element which is kind of like the idea of echoes, where there's elements that are sort of repeating themselves in the photo. And it's another compositional technique. In this case, the woman in the background is kind of echoing the woman in the foreground. So we're talking earlier about the fact they've both got sort of similar length hair, similar colour hair. And if we're going back to this notion of the relationship between the elements, because there's a similarity there, you can't help but start wonder, well, what's the relationship then between the woman in the picture and the woman in the background? I mean, first of all, there's an odd thing. Anne is just sticking on the lipstick. There's a dead body in the background. Why is she sort of so casual about it? They've got similar hair. What's the relationship? Is this her daughter sitting in the background? Then I remember showing somebody this once, and I'd not long done the photo. And then suddenly somebody said, "Oh, that's a memory, isn't it?" I was sort of, "What do you mean?" She said, "Oh, the woman in the background, obviously that's when she was younger, and she's just remembering this time when she was involved in something when she was younger. And I thought, oh, that's bloody brilliant. I love that. It was a whole new level of interpretation that I just never considered before. And I love that idea that, you know, other people can then find new interpretations within the work. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Oddly though, while some people really love this photo, some people are absolutely turned off by it. I've had people come along to an exhibition where I had this, and you know, it was, oh, good, yeah, take it away. It's you know, how tasteless. How could you possibly do a photo of a murder scene? You know, and it was sort of seen as crass and wrong. So, I mean, whatever you do, you're never going to please anybody. I mean, I'm coming at this very much from a kind of movie perspective. You know, for me it is film noir, femme fatale, it's that fantasy story thing, so I'm not worrying about this being a documentary. Another aspect to this photo, which I will just draw your attention back to before I move on to the next stage, which is the fact that Anne is not looking at her reflection, she is looking at you. And this was something I discovered from a year or two before when I was doing photography, which is that changes things massively. It's kind of in the fact that she's looking at you suddenly makes you feel like you are now involved in the photo. It's like you've stepped into the room and you've suddenly, she's turned her eyes to you, you've seen this scene, there's this moment, a pause, somewhere off in the distance a dog barks. And so it's not just a case of you're watching what's going on, you're now actually involved in what's going on. So that's what I wanted to talk about with this particular image. I'm just going to now do a quick check on Facebook, and let's flick this back to here, see if I've got any interesting comments. Brian, hi. Manoj, I hope that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, took me just a second to see the knife, like you said. Eyes caught the eye. Great. Mandy, all right. Mandy always liked the photo. Always thought it was the lady who put the lipstick on past memory when she was younger. Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about. Keith, you said this was done for an image for a book. However, the image is landscape format. Did I have to crop it to fit it on the page? No, actually, the book itself was done in a landscape format. It wasn't a huge book. It was probably, I don't know, it was about a collection of about a dozen or 15 different poems, and there was the picture was on with each poem. There was a picture that had inspired the poem, and then there was the poem. So I can't remember why, but it was decided to be a landscape format for the. So on the back page, this picture then fitted perfectly. VG, this and the airplane photo made me follow your blog. Ah, okay, thank you. Nice to hear you explaining techniques. Well, thanks, VG. Mandy, hi Kim, hi Mandy. Peaky Blinders photo you did. Well, I will come on to the Peaky Blinders photo, not this time, but thanks for the kind words. Right, okay, well, I'm going to move on to the critique section in a sec. So, you know, by all means, carry on leaving message. If you've got any questions, I'll come back and discuss that a bit more. See what, you know, if you've got anything else written. So the notion then of critique. Actually, just before I get on to critique, I will just say that if you are enjoying what I'm doing, if you feel that you're getting extra benefit from it, do please consider the idea of a donation. You'll see just sort of tucked down underneath where it says Facebook Live, there's paypal.me/Kim Ayres, where you can just log on and give a wee donation. Absolutely not compulsory. It is always appreciated. The other thing I wanted to say as well is the fact that I am recording these as I'm doing them, and then I upload them to YouTube. So if you missed the start of this, if you have missed previous episodes, just tuned in for the first time, you thought, I wonder what else he's been talking about, do go to my YouTube, which is, again, just pointed here, youtube.com/Kim Kim Ayres, and subscribe. And please get your friends to subscribe as well. I'm trying to get the numbers up. Once you get to 1,000 subscribers, there's new options opportunities open to you with what you can do with YouTube. So yeah, anyway, all the rest of my social media are just here, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. I don't do a lot of Twitter, but if you're a Twitter, you can connect there. Also, my blog. VG just mentioned there the fact that I bet VG essentially threw my blog a few years ago. What I'm currently doing at the moment, each time I'm putting these up, I'm writing a short blog post as well about some of the thoughts and ideas behind creating these podcasts, which I'm here, I'm doing it. I keep getting tripped up by the technology. I keep suffering from my nerves. I keep getting ideas and getting different kinds of feedback. It's changing. So if you'd like to kind of follow what's going on there, do check out the blog as well, kimayres.blogspot.com. And of course, there's my website as well. So now the notion of critique or feedback on images. This notion of we do our photos, but it's really difficult to try and get honest feedback. Honest, tactful feedback on our images. We shove up our stuff on Facebook, everybody clicks like, or some people click like, and those who don't like it don't click anything. So we only get people giving us positive feedback, we don't get any of the negative, and so we can end up with a very warped, skewed idea of how good our images actually are. Also, sometimes we get a warped idea because I stick up what might be a really good photo in a photographic context, but social media is social. And so anything which looks social tends to, by its nature, get more likes. A photo of me with my daughter having a hot chocolate will get 10 times the amount of likes of me doing my finest, well-crafted photo on Facebook. And even though the quick selfie with my daughter isn't technically a great photo, but it doesn't have to be for social media. For social media, it's social. People just go, oh, lovely, dad and daughter. Click, like. It's a very easy like. So how do you get to improve your photography? It's very difficult yourself because you're kind of too close to it. So this is the whole point of doing the critique section. So what am I going to look at here, first of all? I think what I'm going to do is I'll start with VG because VG's in India and she's 5.5 hours ahead, so she's already way past midnight, and I know she's staying up and not watching the repeat. So we'll start there. So let's this time I remember to flick back and we will put. Okay, VG's got 2 images. We'll drag this one in first because actually I'm going to have to challenge something where she says, photographs I took on my recent trip to Thailand. This one with the leaf is actually floating on the water, but the water body is not visible in this photograph. How can I bring that into effect in this photograph? Well, actually, when I started zooming into this, I realized it isn't floating on the water. It's underneath the water, and if you're looking closely just here, you've got the stem just sticking out the top of it. And then if we look over here, there's a tiny little bit there where just the tip, so only the tip and the end of the stem are actually sticking out the water. It's not floating, it is under the water. And that's why you won't get any reflection of the leaf in the water either. As for other reflections, it's all to do with the angle you happen to be sitting at. And this looks like it drops down, it's into a pool. And the sun is shining straight through, so it's at its brightest. If the pool was darker, you would then get the reflected surfaces around it. But because the pool is very bright, or the bottom of the pool is very bright, all the light is coming up through, and so you're not really getting any reflections. So there isn't really, the short answer is there isn't a way to make it look like, to bring out the reflections in this particular image, because you would have had to have taken a different photo in the first place. But your second photo, this was the one that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, is this one here. Now, what VG says here is the other photograph was taken when we were ferrying across the island to reach land. there was this storm that was looming over. This photograph was taken when it slowly started to drizzle before it broke into torrential rain. It was like fearsome when we were in the middle of nowhere in a small ferry with waves lurching. I want to bring that moment back. How can I make this photo more dramatic? Now, again, part of the problem we've got here, VG, is that you've got this photo which you say you took as the drizzle started, just as the rain started, and we can zoom in and we can start to see some of these raindrops appearing. I don't know whether they're splashing on the window or they're just appearing in the sky. And then you talk about the fact that before it broke into torrential rain and the waves were lurching. So this is before the waves were lurching. And you can't then sort of import the waves unless you really want to get into composites and overlaying other images. So you're kind of at that point. But I understand the desire to sort of... What you're trying to capture is this idea of the storm looming, the threatening aspect of it. Now, part of the problem is this: the sky does already look quite dramatic, but the ground, the mountains there that are more or less in silhouette. So we're just getting the outside of them, or the silhouette, the edge of them. The sea, despite the fact that it might have started to be feeling a bit choppy, from this angle looks relatively flat. So you just don't have the elements there to really recreate your memory. Your memory is being on this boat, which is being tossed and turned, and dramatic waves and wind and heavy rain, and that's a really dramatic experience. But the photo doesn't reflect that experience, and it doesn't reflect that experience to anybody who wasn't there. You see the photo, it takes you back to it, and then you wonder why you're not getting that, why the photo doesn't really reflect it. So there's nothing that I can do directly with this photo to recreate that as you would have seen it. But the thing is with photography, and the thing is with editing, once you get past the idea of photos as somehow truth tellers, the idea that you've got to capture what's actually there, which is all an illusion anyway. Photography is not, the idea the camera never lies is nonsense. The camera never tells the truth. The camera never can tell the truth. I'm sure I talked about this before, and I will talk about it again. The camera is a tool for capturing light and dark from a particular angle for a fraction of a second. That's what it is. And then you, as a photographer, interpret that. You use your tools to tell a story which tries to reflect your experience. And that doesn't always come from just photographing what's there. It's like recounting the facts. Recounting the facts of an event don't necessarily reflect the drama of the events. Whereas a story might be complete fiction, and yet it brings up the emotional experience far more strongly than just the recollection of the facts. So with something like this, I'd be very tempted to go down a route of really just mucking around with the editing. You've got a basic starting point, which is a fairly dramatic sky. And I think if you start contrasting that sky and playing with it, you can start creating something more. You're moving away from literal truth, but now you're moving into more of a kind of artistic flow. So let me give you an example of what I mean. I think the first thing you could do... Now, first thing I'll probably do is turn it to black and white. Because in black and white, there's hardly any colour there. So the colour itself... So let's just do a very quick... if I go to gradient map, I've got black and white bits over here. So a gradient map will just move the lightest parts from white to the darkest parts, which are black. So I do that. And it's immediately sort of made it slightly more dramatic. We can play with the curves. The curves, I can grab this little line here, I can pull it up, make it brighter, I can pull it down, make it darker. I can push it up here and create this little kind of S-bend, where you make the lights lighter and the darks darker. So that creates, again, a little bit more drama. So we've already started maybe getting somewhere. Let me do this in Camera Raw for a moment. So if I just copy that and go into Camera Raw, because this allows me to play with several things at the same time. So I will hit desaturation. So that's just removing the color. I will up the exposure a little bit, bring the shadows up a little bit, highlights down a little bit, but then I'm going to grab the clarity and just pull a bit more texture out of things here. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the curves from, actually before I do that, I'm going to give it a vignette, I think. So a vignette allows us to either lighten the corners or darken the corners. So I'm going to darken the corners somewhat so that it's bringing our attention into the middle. And then I'm going to grab those curves and I'm just going to pull that down a bit and I'm going to push that bit up a bit, creating that S curve that I was talking about. And let's just click OK on that. So you can see now we've gone from here to here, and it's immediately a more dramatic, slightly more dramatic photo, full of more foreboding. But I think that, I was playing with this earlier because there's another little trick I want to talk about. Now, there's a German photographer I know, his friend, online we've known each other for more than a decade and we've always had great conversations, never actually met him in person, Christoph Hessel. In the YouTube version, if I remember, I'll put a link to his Instagram site. And what Christoph's really good at doing, he's got a whole series of photos he's been doing over the last year or two, where he's been doing sort of dramatic black and white things. Now, what I'm going to do here isn't a touch on what he's doing. Let's just say a quick influence. But he sort of plays around with mixing in blurring with dramatic light, but not everywhere. So what I want to do here to show you this, now there's an option where you can, if I go to filter blur, now there's different kinds of blurs you can do. I can make that kind of all-round blur, but what I'm actually going to do instead, I think I want to create a movement blur. So if I go to filter blur, motion blur, now I can change. There's a little bit over on the right here where I can change the angle of it. I can have it running diagonally or I can have it running off to one side, but I want it running exactly 0. I want this sort of sideways. Now we can then change, you can change the severity of it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more to completely and utterly unrecognizable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it sort of somewhere around here, I think. It's all guesswork and this is only very, very roughly done. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a mask on, which creates that. And now what that mask allows me to do is to now paint over that. If I go to paintbrush and I turn this to black, where it's white means that we've just got this sitting here. Now when I paint black on it, it's almost like rubbing the mask out, or allowing you to see what's below it. So let's increase the size of the brush. So if I rub over it completely, we've just got the whole thing in itself. If I just rub down this side, you can see that it's just revealing this side. But what I want to do, I'm going to soften, rather than have 100%, I'm going to go down to something like 65. And I'm just going to paint in a little bit of where the cloud is at its most dramatic. And just kind of soften the edges, perhaps, something like that. Maybe flip back, just paint a little bit more of that in, and then take the blur back in up there. And I think, in a way, what you've got here then, now, is it's not a full representation of what you had, but it's now created a mood. This is all done very, very quickly. This isn't expected to be an award-winning or a Canberra Club submission level. But all I wanted to really do is show you, VG, how you can take a picture and play with it. And something like this now we've gone quite abstract with it. It's still recognizable as a dark, stormy sky. What you've got here, though, is a sense of foreboding. But we have moved into an abstract. We have moved into sort of almost watercolory kind of things, mixing with harder bits. Don't be afraid to play. just go in and play and muck around with as many different sliders as you can find. Muck around with giving it a color shift. Do whatever you want. If the photo itself isn't going to be able to give you directly what you want, repurpose it. See if you can take it in a different direction and explore the emotion of it. If you're trying to avoid, if you can't do anything with the accuracy of it in terms of tying it up with your memory. So I hope that gives you a few ideas, VG. So next one I'm going to look at now is, let's see, I'll go with Sheila. So Sheila sent me this image, and she says, I took this photo on a very bright, hot clipping day. I was hoping to show what an exhausting, hard job this is and would appreciate any advice. I also tried it in mono to see if that would help. Trying it in mono is basically another shortcut term for saying I tried it in black and white. And if we go to, again, what I'll just do is do that quick gradient map. You can see you can put it in black and white. So it's black and white. Has it added any more? Not particularly. So yeah, I can see the problem with. Now, the thing is with this one, Sheila, what I would really say, I think, is the main problem is the direction of the lines are vertical and horizontal. Now, if you saw the one that I was talking about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking about the notion of diagonals. And this is where I think would make a huge difference to this photo. And it means that at the time you've got to be in a place whereby you are watching where the arms are going, you're watching where the sheep goes, to try and introduce more diagonals. The bit that I was talking about at the time was the notion that the verticals and horizontals in a picture are what give it stability, or give it grounding, or give it structure. But it's the diagonals that give it movement. It's diagonals that give it energy. And the more diagonals you have, and the more prominent and powerful the diagonals are, the more energy and drive the photo usually has. And whereas if, again, let's just shove a little layer on here and go back to the pencil tool here. This arm here is very straight. His back is straight. His legs, slight diagonal, not really worth going much. The leg of the sheep is coming off here. The line of the shed is going across here. There's extra lines going. There's extra lines going. The only real diagonal, there's a bit of a diagonal curve in his arm, but it's not enough to outweigh all those horizontals and verticals. And although it won't, you know, again, we are going to go very, very rough. I just purely want to show you, if I I'll duplicate that layer. So I've got a second layer here of the same thing. So what that allows me to do is I will just transform this, and I will free transform. And I'm going to angle that a little bit like that. Now, obviously, this isn't going to work as a thing properly. Now, I will just mask that and rub out a little bit of the background, because all I'm really trying to do is give you, oh, sorry, that should be up at 100%, a very rough idea of what it might look like if he'd been standing at a different angle. It's absolutely not perfect, and you know, not intended to be anything other than a rough. I'm just trying to show you that at the moment he's now at an angle. Now obviously he couldn't stand like that because he would fall over, and probably at this point his leg would have come out to the side to hold himself steady. But if you just notice then that the idea that you've then got the driving line, then his arm is going and his leg is going this way. We've got this much stronger diagonal, and the sense of movement and energy within it moves up a level. So when you're taking a photo like this, if you're trying to capture a notion of the action, always look for the diagonals. Also change your angle. I mean, I think if you'd sort of been at a slightly lower level, if you allowed yourself to come down, it looks like he's on some kind of, let's just remove that bit because it's, yeah, he's on some kind of decking. if you drop down to kind of knee height, so you've been actually more kind of at the sheep's head height, and then you've been looking up, so you've been capturing the sheep and his arm coming down towards the bottom of the picture, but you'd also got him with a bit more sky behind him, and you got him at some interesting angles. Then I think you would have had a sense of energy, and especially if maybe you'd used a wide angle lens, that can really kind of accentuate that as well. So I hope that gives you some ideas, Sheila. Again, maybe doesn't answer completely what you can do with this photo, but should give you a sense of what you can do in the future with that. Next photo I want to talk about comes from Paul, and Paul sent me, well, he sent me 3. I'll do that one. Sorry, I'll undo that. Open that one with Photoshop, and then open that one with Photoshop. So that's his original photo, that's his edited version, and then that's threw it into black and white. And Paul said, I've attached an image from my summer in Stockholm. I've attached both the original and my edited attempts. I thought it might work as an image showing how carefree pre-pandemic life was before social distancing. I like the overall image, but there are obviously a few distracting elements. Comments welcome as ever. Now, his first level of editing, I think that works better than the original. I mean, apart from, obviously he's tilted it to get the thing up, but I also think the original JPEG has got the colours slightly oversaturated. I think that slightly desaturating helps better. Plus, of course, he's also brought out more detail in the shadows and darkened down the highlights a bit. So the balance overall is better. There's more texture. So the edit does work as a better edit of that version of that photo. But the question is fine, he's got the image is sharp enough. The image has captured everything, but it still doesn't feel fully like it's there. So what do you do next? And of course, he's done exactly what I just did with VG and what I did for Sheila, is what Sheila tried, which is you go to black and white. And so you throw in a black and white. Has it added anything? No, not really. And if I started sort of using that S-curve thing and lightening the lights and darkening the darks, we would actually lose the very beneficial bit where he's drawn the detail out of the shadows in the first place. So there's no point in that. I think the problem that we really have here, Paul, is that there isn't anything to draw the eye and let, first of all. Now, if you think about the Undefended Hour, you go straight into the woman sticking on the lipstick, and then you start moving around the photo. But even in VG's, well, certainly the edited version of what we were doing with VG's pre-stormy, the storm clouds, you get drawn straight to the stormy cloud. That contrast between light and dark, and then you start moving around, and you're getting a feeling for it. With this, there's too many things going on without any one thing being dominant. So yeah, it is a kind of a casual move around, but there isn't anything to grab your attention in the first place. You've got various different stories going on. Wrong one. We've got some interesting windows happening up the top here. You've got 2 open ones, we've got a closed one. If we go back a couple of weeks to another photo, was it you who committed? I can't remember now. There's 1 closed, 2 open windows. Is there something? There's not. Some cacti in the windows. Not enough really there to keep it going. Now there's some, bits and pieces above the door. There's the door itself. There's shoppers or not shoppers. People sitting having their cup of tea or their beer. And you've got people moving around. But I really think the main problem is that there isn't anything in and of itself. As a one in a collection, if you had 3 photos all taken from exactly the same angle, but each time there was an entirely different layout, then you've got something whereby the story is the interaction between one photo and the next. But with this, there just isn't enough to really keep the attention. There's what's happening? It's just lots of little things happening with no dominant storyline. It's like a sort of chatter in the background without a voiceover. You need the strong voice, and then you can have the sound effects in the background, that's fine, but you need the voice in the first place. And this is the bit where you can hear the crowd, but there isn't the story to then take you somewhere with it. So in terms of a kind of loose atmospheric photo, fine, but I think if you're really feeling that it's not delivering, I think that's really where your key is the fact that there isn't something to grab hold of. So I hope that helps, Paul. Finally, the last photo I want to deal with just now is one that came from Daphne, and rather wonderfully, Daphne put this one up. It was either the following day or even straight after the same evening that I did last week's podcast, and that gave me a little bit of time to really look at it and play with it. Now, it's not a super high resolution photo, but it's fine, it'll do for the moment. Now, so this is the photo, and this is Daphne's comment. Here's one I took of Brussels South Railway Station at night. It gives the effect of being stretched, although this is just how it came out, no tweaking. Something sinister about it. This is not the Eurostar platform, just to reassure anyone planning a trip to Brussels. I think top and bottom could be cropped. Anything else I could do to capture that painting-like quality you're so good at? Comments from group welcome. Well, I don't think anybody else from the group did comment on this one. However, now, when I first saw it, I just wasn't fully sure what I was looking at. You can, I mean, there's a great big gap at the top here, and that's, so you do get the feeling, yes, you could crop. The action is all happening in this space. It does look like it's been stretched out by that, but actually I'm not totally sure. I think it is a bit more of an illusion. Now, if I duplicate that layer, go into camera raw, if I just click auto, what does it do? Okay, take that off, it makes it very yellow. Let's bring out the shadows. If I pull shadows, blacks, make them whiter, you can start to see a little bit of detail. There is detail going up on here. There is a train track coming out here. Now, the biggest problem that we've really got with this is the fact that because it was taken in low light conditions, the ISO on the camera has gone through the roof. It's maxed out, which means it's very pixelated. It's very bitty. So even if let's just find a bit here. As soon as I zoom in, we can see that it's very kind of pixelated and noisy. And when you start off with a noisy photo, the moment you start doing anything you start adjusting it and brightening it up, it exaggerates that problem. But what I'm going to do though is I'll lighten that up a bit. I'll bring the shadows up a little bit. Now, the immediate problem here is the fact that it's very yellow. Now, we can play around with the color. If I give that a blue shift, I can bring it down, make it a little bit more kind of slightly more natural daylight-ish, something like that. I think that kind of becomes a bit interesting. So immediately that's giving us a little bit more to play with. I think even if this part up the top is still a bit dark, we've got a little bit more rail here, which is reminding us that this is a station. This post here is very dominant, and especially with the bright light above it. So if we go back into camera raw, the first thing I will probably do with that is take the highlights and then try and... It's a tricky thing here, because if I drag the highlights down, the whole lot gets a bit darker. But I'm not so keen on that really bright dominant part. But it is tricky here because, yeah, I've lost. But what can we do? We can drag this, so let's pull this down a bit. But now I am going to leave the little bit of railway in. And although that says Brussels over in the right-hand corner, I don't think it's really editing. Where I start thinking this real story is in here. Let's pull this in a bit. And we'll just pull this up now. Because actually, let's just rotate that a little fraction, because it's feeling slightly flat. No, gone too far. That's a tricky one. How much is this going to rotate before it feels like it's going in the wrong direction? Let's just try that a little bit. Not sure whether I've tilted too far. This is a real you can spend for hours trying to play around with trying to get these things lined up. Another option is to actually literally grab one corner and stretch it. Yeah, that actually works slightly better. It allows me to muck around with getting the horizontals and the verticals where I want them. So we've got that. Now, to go back to that notion of playing around, you see what we've got here, what I really like, and it isn't really that obvious in the colours here, and especially when it's all yellow, is we've got a lone person standing here, and then we've got a couple of little silhouettes in the back. And I think really that's where the story is. The story is this huge layer going into the picture, and then alone, just barely a couple of people there, this very late night feel to it. Now the colour schemes, even though I've shifted out of the yellow, still isn't really doing it for us. So at this point, I would go black and white. And so let's see what happens. If we go to the camera raw here, and I will desaturate. Now, it's still not giving us much, but this is where things like the clarity, see that clarity, that starts bringing out much more depth, and I much more like that. Go back, and we'll give this a vignette again. I'll pull in the edges, and back here I will play with that. I will pull that clarity up. Maybe I will take the curves and I will pull it down and do that little S bend kind of thing, and which is really playing with that contrast. And now I think we're getting somewhere. Again, another little trick that you have with noisiness, with noisy photos, is in colour it just becomes messy. But sometimes when you drop it into black and white, the noise imitates grain, which on old photos, old black and white photos from the 60s, 70s, what have you, analog times, in low light, photographers would use a higher ISO film, which would allow them to take photos in low light, but you had this grainy quality to them. And so because we kind of grown up with that, we can accept grain better than we can accept noise, even though it's more or less the same thing. And I know there are experts out there who will tell me they are different, but we can argue about that another time. By and large, for most of us, certainly at this level, playing around with photography on a web size image, this graininess now doesn't seem to matter so much. The noisiness has become grain. And now we can start to make out, there's a bit more contrast with this guy here. And in fact, if I go and, let's see, just do the dodge tool, brighten him up a little bit. And maybe even with the burn tool, darken down the background a touch more so that he stands out just that little bit more. I think we've got something a bit more interesting. Now, what I would love you to do, and if I don't know how you're social distancing or what it's like going on in Brussels, but if you've got another chance and you're there again, is maybe try and take the photo without this great big pole in the way, because I think, it is overpowering. Now I can, if I use the burn tool on the highlights, I'll whack that up just to kind of show you, I can darken that down a bit, even darken that one down a bit, because these are grabbing the attention somewhat. That's a very, very quick, messy way of doing it, and it's not working fully, but it does give you an idea of the fact that it's not maybe grabbing your eye quite so much. But to be honest, I think this kind of works better. You know, if you're working in these low light situations, look for contrast and think black and white. And now you see what we have is we've got these parallel lines. We've now got, you know, the light of the dark, the light, the dark, the light, the dark, the light, the dark, and so on. And at the same time, because of the light patches of, you know, where the lights are under here, we've got lines drawing in here and here and here, and also reflected in the off the platforms themselves as well. So we do have these leading lines. Whilst the lines are very strongly horizontal, you've still got those diagonals leading into the picture, and the lone person in themselves set against that sort of darker background, I think then becomes the key story to this photo. So yeah, go back there, play with it. I think there's a lot of potential with this. You may be limited because of the noise levels and the resolution as to what you can do with this actual photo. But then if you've got the high resolution version, definitely by all means, you know, play with that, because there's something about that I quite like. And this story, there is, yeah, that sense of loneliness and emptiness and nighttime, but also vulnerability that you have with this late at night when nobody else is around. So that's critique. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip back and see if we have any more last photos, Facebook comments. Oh, Theanne stopped by from Florida. Hi Theanne, opposite problem to VG, you're presumably kind of mid-afternoon there. VG, thanks, trying to sharpen editing skills, that's fine. Lucianne, hi, glad you could make it. Okay, that's pretty much where we've kind of got to with this. Next week, now that I know that picture of my daughter is up on is on the cover of the new D&G Life, I will I want to talk about that photo, because there's another aspect to it, which is because it was a planned photo. I designed the photo hoping, you know, I designed the photo kind of hoping that, well, you know, you never know, it might get on the cover. There's never, ever, ever any guarantees. Even if you've been commissioned to do a cover for a magazine, there's no guarantee it will get on. But there is a notion of planning, and there is a notion of storytelling, and it is literally the most recent narrative photo that I've done, because it's been done during lockdown out in the garden by the garden shed. So I want to talk a little bit about that, give you a little bit of insight into the thought processes behind that, and also how you can sometimes go around sketching an idea. So tune in next week for that. As I said earlier, with the notion of PayPal, if you've enjoyed this, you'd like to make a donation, do check out go to paypal.me/Chimeras, and feel free to donate. And a copy of this will be up on YouTube, usually within 24 to 48 hours. Other than that, I think that's pretty much about it. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you've found this enjoyable, useful. Do tell your friends about it. If you go to YouTube, do subscribe, and I'll see you next Tuesday at 7:30. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.